It
Well,
is.
I think we've got quite a few people. Maybe we should get started now.
Okay. So, I can introduce us. We can each introduce ourselves, your three hosts today. My name is Barbara Boyd, and as I mentioned, I live in Italy, and I'm a book coach and an editor. Also done ghostwriting and written a dozen or so of my own nonfiction books, and one of the 3 Author Accelerator certified book coaches, hosting mainly memoir. And as it looks like on my Brady Bunch screen, I have Suzanne on one side and Suzette on the other. But if you could each introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Sure, I'll be quick while I'm not coughing. I'm Suzanne, and I live in Biddeford, Maine. I'm, the location of the actual retreat is in my building, but I write historical fiction, but I coach a lot of memoir as well, and it's because it's actually really I find the research angle sort of overlaps a lot, plus storytelling. It's all storytelling. Anyway, that's me.
I'm Suzette Mullen. I am also a book coach. I focus on memoir and nonfiction, and I have a special interest in working with LGBTQ plus writers. And I'm also a memoir writer, soon to be published author myself. My memoir, Graveyard of Safe Choices, will be published by the University of Wisconsin Press in just about this time next year. We don't have an exact pub date yet, but it's going to be early winter 2024. So I'm so excited to see all of you here and see some familiar faces, and excited to talk about the emotional roller coaster, because it sure is a hell of a one.
It is. Okay. So a couple people, if you just have joined in, you'll notice in the chat, we asked people to write where they're calling in from and where they might be in the process of writing a memoir. And even if it's just thinking about it, that's a fine answer. A couple of people here are in revision. Some are somewhere in the messy middle, first draft, and envisioning. Lots of, it sounds like everyone, there's at least one person in each place along the memoir writing journey. And so we are having this series of conversations about writing memoir. And today's topic is, as Suzette said, the emotional roller coaster. We talked last month about that your story matters, that we all have stories to tell, and they merit being shared if we choose to share them. And even with that affirmation, it's still very emotional to share our stories, especially if you decide to publish and essentially open your soul to strangers. And I, in my own coaching, have seen oftentimes writers who get through that first draft and hit the emotional wall when they begin revisions. All those doubts come up. Who am I to write this? I don't know how to write. What am I doing? And that's where, having a community of writers who can support you, or a book coach, really helps to get through those phases. Today, I think we'd really love to hear what kind of challenges each of you, those of you who want to share, are facing. And, we can kind of talk about that and also, share some of our own experiences. Even for those of us who haven't written memoir, if you've written other books, there's still that challenge of just feeling doubt or imposter syndrome, and all the feelings that come up with creative expression. So is there anyone who wants to raise their hand and sort of talk about what the challenges that they're facing, or someone who is wanting a little hot seat coaching here tonight? Tonight, it's nighttime for me, sorry. It's afternoon.
Or even just say, what is it, what one particular thing are you afraid of when it comes to, say, your memoirs out in the world?
Oh, that was a good one, but I have an answer for the first question, I think. Just like a general question about routine. I'm on, supposedly after 21 days, you get the habit down with anything. Brushing your teeth, 21 days. Writing a memoir, it's not going to take 21 days, but if you do it 21 days straight, apparently you'll do it forever. And I'm afraid I'm going to lose the routine. So I guess I'm asking, like, how do you write every day? What's the frequency? Do you count your words? Like sometimes I do a word count thing. How do you keep going back to the page?
It's a good question. The flip side of those 21 days is if you miss one day, it's what do they call that? A mistake or a slip up. It's when it becomes 2 days that it's dangerous. But that said, I think everyone has a different routine that works for them. I have a client who has scheduled 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week. There are some people who can only write on the weekends. There's some who binge write. I think it's Cheryl Strayed who talks about that she has long periods of time that she doesn't write and then gets into a project and writes. So habits aren't necessarily something that we do daily. I think it's hard to compare writing to brushing your teeth. But it's such a personal thing. For myself, when I've been writing, I do need to have, I tend to think about how many words I need to do a day or pages, depending on whether it's in revisions or being freshly written, and treating it like a job, because at the times that I've been writing books, it has been my job. So I need to show up to work. So I can't wait until the muse shows up. So figuring out what that good time is. The other thing is figuring out what your kind of rhythm is, I would say. So whether the morning works, or maybe it's mid-morning. Some people are night owls. So figuring out what time of day you feel freshest and most committed to the page. Anybody else want to share their practices about writing?
I was just going to say that it also is, ask yourself, what is it that's stopping you from getting back to the page, and sort of looking at that, where's the anxiety or the fear? Fear. I had somebody in the chat says that they're afraid no one will read it. And if they do read it, they will not like it. That's a valid fear.
I think for me, I have to reduce my expectations for the outcome on the page, because I get so lofty, like I'm going to write this beautiful thing today. And I have to just back that down to write one sentence. Just write a sentence. It can be complete garbage, but just write a sentence. And then it somehow opens the gate. And I'm usually, okay, a paragraph. Okay, now 2 paragraphs. But I just have to pull back from that. You're going to write this great, amazing piece of literature today. Can't do that.
Pulitzer Prize, right? Yeah. So, and I think that, it also, so much of it depends on where you are in your writing process. So if you're writing a first draft, right now I'm working on a course for my LGBTQ plus writers. And so I've been in first draft material, and, you're writing a first draft to just try to get in that mindset that it is just about getting the story onto the page as best you understand it in that. And It's not about beautiful, beautiful words and beautiful sentences, because in your first draft, even if you write beautiful words and beautiful sentences, they may not make the cut when you get into revision. And yeah, and I like what Suzanne had to say, because when we are resisting getting ourselves to the page, to really try to examine what that resistance is about. And I think there often is a lot of fear at the core of it, that what we're doing doesn't matter, or it's not going to be any good. And yeah, good stuff.
I would also say to I all the time, what's in my head is outstanding, and it never shows up on the page that way. And I know I'm not alone in that experience. But what I've seen with clients who have a consistent writing practice, how much they have improved over time. I'm working with a client on her third memoir. And when I think back to how she wrote on the first memoir and how far she has come with a very consistent writing practice over the last 4 or 5 years, it's just amazing how much that consistency makes a difference in the quality of your writing. You begin to see what's good and somehow maybe tap into it, just like probably like playing an instrument or learning a sport or dance or anything that takes practice. It does get better over time with that consistent practice. So Linda has a comment here about, I'm afraid no one will read it, and if they do read it, they will not like it.
Yeah, that was me, especially after spending 3 years on something and it's not done. It's another year or so out. So, I mean, I tell myself in those dark moments that it's what's been important is me getting the story down in the memoir, right? That it's been very a healing journey for me, and that it doesn't matter if anybody reads it or not. But it does matter, you know.
It does matter. When you say that you worry that they won't like it, do you mean just in terms of the story itself or the writing style?
No, the quality of the writing.
The quality of the writing.
Yeah.
So that I think is something that you can certainly address, and knowing that going into it, there's help available, whether that's in the form of beta readers or a book coach or a writing community to improve if you feel that it's not to the level that you want it to be. Is this your first effort in writing anything
yes.
long form?
Yeah, first
What's
effort. Who have beta readers, I'm in writing groups, have a very supportive community, and actually reading other people's writing and commenting on it is so helpful in terms of what works or what doesn't work, for me as a reader anyway. So yeah, it is a roller coaster, right? Because some days I feel like I'm just sailing, like this is fantastic, love this. And then some days it's like, why am I spending my time doing this?
But do you find sometimes you can't not do it?
Oh yeah, I've tried to put it away. I can't put it away.
So, I mean, that's also something to tap into.
Yeah, I have a Colton, go ahead.
No. I was just saying that's a good thing, Linda. That's a good thing that you can't put it down. One time I tried to quit skateboarding, couldn't happen. Found out I was a skateboarder.
Yeah, I have a quick poll that I'm just going to throw up there for everybody, because we're talking about writing and the quality of writing. And I think it's anonymous, so you can say what you want there.
Nice. The other thing, Linda, to think about, like, what's the worst thing someone would say? When we work with the blueprint for a book, one of the questions is, to ask writers to write their dream book review and their nightmare book review. And the nightmare book review often reveals what we're most afraid of. But if you know that, you can also work to avoid it.
So what's really good is that almost all of you consider yourselves writers, which is huge, especially when it comes to writing a memoir, because I think it's easy to feel like, especially if it's your first book that you've ever tried to write. A lot of times a memoir is the first long form writing project that somebody does. So do you think that thinking of yourself as a writer, does that make you more or less fearful? I'm just curious about that. And Madeline's laughing.
Lisa, did you want to ask something or say something?
Hi, yeah, it doesn't relate to what Suzanne just said though. So it relates to the general topic of, emotional roller coaster. So that's all right. Yeah, just thinking about the various levels of vulnerability. So vulnerability in obviously like sharing one's story or aspects of it, but then also the personal level of vulnerability in address like just sitting there and writing up that material, right? Or addressing it. So like I have 16 gazillion trillion, it's an accurate number, traumatic events in my lifetime thus far. I don't want to do some kind of like trauma porn thing, but these are things that happen in my life. And I'm like I put in the chat, like I had started writing years ago on memoir and studying it and everything, and then life crap happened, more crap, where I would feel actual literal nausea when I kept going back to my manuscript, to where it was like, okay, I need to stop this completely. So I walked away from it, and it's only in the last few years that I'm coming back to the idea of writing memoir. And I've like, I've written short pieces, but like if anybody has any thoughts on, on these levels of vulnerability and how, it's like, yes, I have a therapist, all that stuff, but like, just perspectives from other writers and you wonderful coaches.
Well, I'm going to put Cameron, can I put you on the spot for a second?
Sure.
So Cameron is a new client of mine, and he is a psychologist. And I wonder if you might have some wisdom to share about how to manage the feelings that necessarily or that often reemerge that when you're writing about trauma and kind of best practices for that.
Well, I would say that number one, you have to give yourself breaks when you approach it. Just don't try to hang in there and just eat yourself alive until you've gotten this, baby birth. I mean, you've got to take breaks, you've got to pull back, take care of yourself, go for walks, use art, use music, anything that can soothe you. And I actually have the trauma background as well, personally. And it's been a real process of overcoming the shame that I learned about revealing yourself and revealing your story. I was taught never to do that. Don't talk about it. Don't put it out there. And me being able to recognize that I've got this old programming that's telling me, stop, don't do it. There's bad thing that's going to happen if you express your truth, has been a real growth process to learn how to say it's okay. It's okay for me to tell my story, have my feelings, put it on the page, and then go take care of myself. Hopefully that helped.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
I love what Ursula said in the chat about being seen is risky. Ursula, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I can relate fully to the trauma commentary, and I had never heard the phrase trauma porn thing, so I wrote that down, Lisa. Thank you for that. Trauma porn, good Lord. But anyways, definitely, I've just thinking about writing. I have two projects I've been working on, and they're both in revision, which is challenging in and of itself. What do you leave in? What do you take out? What do you cull? What is real? What do you want people to know? But if you put something in writing and you circulate it, suddenly people you may not want to be intimate with are intimate with you. They know something major in your life that you may not share over dinner or over upon first meeting. I mean, I'm just thinking about some of the trauma I've experienced that, yes, I might share that with a close family member and discuss it, but in a group with people who may or may not have good intentions towards me, it is extremely risky and frightening at times. And, setting up a wall between you and the reader, you don't want to have that in your work. But when you're traveling through life and you come across somebody who's read something of yours that's very personal, how do you put those defenses back up? That's something I just just thinking about that. And then if somebody sees your history, sees your pain, sees your whatever it is, sees where you're vulnerable, there are people who use that. And having some familiarity with abusers, there are people who use that. And so it is a big risk to put it out there. But on the other hand, there's other people who may be experiencing things that similar to what you did, and what you've come through, healthier or stronger. And sharing it, you have to decide, is it worth, do I want to share this? Do I want to take that risk or not? And that's kind of where I was going with that. But it is very hard to cull certain things out or to put certain things in, like the really scary stuff. Sometimes we're just right around the scary stuff and we don't get there.
That's so true. And also what your point that you made, Ursula, too, I think, I don't know, my brain's a little fuzzy, but it kind of depends on what effect you want your memoir to have, and what you're expecting from your readers.
Isn't that answer always truth? Or like
Not truth, maybe, but I'm thinking of what's the emotional experience you want your readers to have.
Okay. But what emotional reaction is your attendant audience, or you're looking them to have, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
You want them. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Suzanne. No, I was just thinking about I often think of the difference between something that's private and something that's personal. And at the point where you are deciding what remains and what gets pulled, because oftentimes, especially with writing memoir, there's a cathartic experience of getting everything out on the page, but then really deciding what's necessary. I like to think of what are some of the things that happen to us inform the way that we write, but we don't necessarily have to tell everything. And to Suzanne's point, what is that message? What are the emotions that you want the reader to experience? And then make those choices based on that. Colton writes that, that's what editors are for, but I don't know that editors can make all the choices about content. I mean, here we are talking about content, and as Suzanne says, the decision is a very personal one, and that's where I think I know with my own clients, when I've ghostwritten books for people, I ask them to tell me everything, but that doesn't mean that it's going to show up on the page, but that it informs what ends up on the page, and that keeping the reader in mind and what the reader needs to know to have that experience.
Very true. Very true. I just want to say I joke a lot. I probably should have started out by saying I'm a senior editor in healthcare marketing. So yeah, I know I'm never trying to change the content, and my account teams, it's always creative versus the account teams. They're always trying to change. I work with patients, and we call them ambassadors. They're always trying to change their voice. They're trying to change their story. And me as an editor, I do not do that. So that was a joke. But I totally get, the content is personal, and there is a certain gravitas, I suppose, to the decision around what you're going to include in your story, your memoir, or whatever. That's it.
Karen said something really important, I think. Karen, do you feel comfortable coming on and talking about that?
You're muted.
Yeah, I can share. I'm a therapist too. So I know a good amount about trauma. I think when I think of trauma recovery, I think we spend a whole lot of time figuring out who's safe and what's safe and what is not safe. And if we, really grow and manage our ability to make good choices, we can steer ourselves away from unsafe people and protect ourselves. But if I put something out in a book, unless I literally hand it out one by one to selected readers, I have lost a certain level of control about what people, not only what they think about it as, is it good writing or bad writing, but even more personally, will I be judged? Will I be unsafe? Will someone come get me? I mean, on and on and on and on and on, which can be real scary. So
sorry.
It takes a huge amount of courage, I think, to know that I will be safe no matter what.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, one of the big differences between writing fiction and writing memoir. There's always anxiety about the writing. Will anybody like what I write? Will people engage with the story? Whatever. But with fiction, you don't have that, deeply personal connection. And so that when you put something out in the world, people are judging it as the product. They're not judging you as the person who's involved. I think that can be really scary.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the many reasons it's important to be part of a writing community or have a support system as you're going through the writing process, because it is scary. It is scary, and I mean, I don't have any big T trauma in my past, but I think like we all have some little T trauma, right? And as I think about my book being out in the world, and thinking about all the things that have just been shared, particularly what Ursula shared about strangers knowing these very intimate details of my life and my mine's a coming out later in life memoir, and it's there's things in there about like my sexual desires. And I'm just like, oh shit. Like, I mean, I wouldn't, like you said, I wouldn't be sitting across the dinner table talking to, the conversation. And yes, some of this is out in the world. And to have that support system. And I wrote an essay this summer that got published on today.com, and it was called The Subaru Should Have Been a Sign. And it was kind of a little mini version of my memoir. And I got a little taste of what it's like to put your story out, in public. And there was a lot of positive comments, and then some just really, really nasty comments. And I had to just stop reading them. And so I think that, you need to, part of this is, yes, making the decision about what you are going to share, and you don't have to share everything. And then having a support system and a plan of how you're going to take care of we were talking about taking care of ourselves as we write, and then continuing to take care of yourself once your writing is out in the world. It's important.
It is. Lisa asked if I could elaborate more about private versus personal. And of course, I'm drawing a blank about an example. I used to have a really good one. But I think the private is something that maybe you wouldn't share with anyone. And maybe those are the details, whereas personal can be the emotion or the part that allows someone else to identify with you. So that pulls out empathy from your reader and also shows empathy to your reader. So it's, I'm going to really work on getting an example now, because it's something I used before.
Barbara, can I jump in as a—
Yes, please do.
As an idea? Yeah. I don't know if this is exactly what you were talking about, but I know a few people who are on here. I know their stories. I'm not going to, share your stories on this call, but I'm thinking about an example. Like, let's say you are. Well, I'll give an example from my own memoir. I had a scene in my memoir about being in bed with my now ex-husband, and it was an important scene to be in the book for the reason of the story, but some of the details about what we were actually doing in bed did not, in some earlier drafts I had a bit more detail. And as I revised, I was like, well, is that necessary? Is that detail necessary to move the story forward for the reader to understand what's happening? Or is it just, vicarious, unnecessary detail that could be embarrassing to either me or my, now ex-husband? And so, yeah, that's the word. Thank you, Suzanne. And so, I made decisions like that as I went along, and particularly when they involved other people, because, when we're writing memoir, there are other people in our story, and we have to think about, can we write our truth and our story in a way that isn't going to be unnecessarily hurtful or embarrassing to those people? And we are making those kinds of decisions all along. So I don't know if that's a good example of sort of the personal or private, Barbara, but that's what came to my mind.
I think it is. And that also speaks to the idea of having to get, I think you may have had to write it in its full detail to tap into the feelings and the emotion, the effect that it had on you. But then in the final version, it's the emotions that kind of give let the reader know what was happening for you. You know, that's the meaning, as opposed to, you know, we talk a lot about sort of the what happened of memoir and what it meant of memoir. And it's really the what it meant that is more interesting, aside from I don't think I can even say that word.
Yeah.
Prurient interest. And so that was an excellent example. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just, you know, to circle back for 1 second about our, you know, our official topic for the day, the emotional roller coaster. I think that one of the things that I know I've certainly experienced, and I think it's common for memoir writers, is that whole question of what, you know, what are other people going to think, and so it could be whether it's the people that are going to read our story that we don't know, the, you know, those hordes of people that are going to be lining up to buy our book, or the people that are still alive that are in our actual story. And I know I've had a lot of those fears bubbling up for me as I anticipate my book being out in the world. You know, what are some of the people in my story gonna, you know, what are they gonna think when they read it? And that's definitely part of the emotional roller coaster, for sure.
Can I share a little personal roller coaster?
Sure.
So, you know, I'm 62 and I've been a psychologist for 34 years and have published a few other books before this, self-help. No problems, lots of confidence, you know, no issues there. But when I got ready to write something really, really personal, I was absolutely terrified. So I decided in my little way to take a creative writing class first at the community college, where I thought, that'll be easier. I can tolerate that. So I take that class. We have to read our stories. No problem. I'm sitting there with 21-year-olds, you know, who are writing stories about, you know, video games and space stories and things. So, you know, my story, they're not even paying attention. Fine. So then the next step, because I got bogged down, was to take a memoir class at Stanford, which is just down the road. I was absolutely terrified to even go into the class. And there are all these brilliant people with PhDs in literature who are now writing their memoirs. I'm shaking. I've written my assignment. The instructor says, "Can you read us a piece?" I absolutely collapsed. I said, I cannot write this. I cannot read it. So he says, "Okay, I'll read it for you." So the instructor reads it for me. I get through the semester. I beg the instructor, "Please meet me for coffee. You have to tell me if I have any talent at all or not, you know, or otherwise I'm not going to continue." He meets me for coffee and he goes, "You can do this. You can do this." I take the class again, the second time. This time the anxiety went way down. I was ready. I wrote an even more personal story, read it to the class without crying, and it was received incredibly well. And I just have to say that was such a healing journey process along that roller coaster for me. Now I'm ready. I'm ready.
Excellent.
That's awesome, Cameron. Can I just say you have that very soothing therapist voice?
Man, I feel so at ease.
But bravo on doing that. That's amazing.
Thank you.
And I think showing up too for something like this is really kind of an indication that you're approaching it in a sort of serious way, that you can do it. It's like one way or another, you're going to be able to write your memoir and get it out there one way or another. I think. Yeah. Exactly.
I think so. Yes. Anyone else? I mean, I think most of you have shared something about this emotional roller coaster that is writing memoir. Is there anyone else who has a question or wants to talk about what they're experiencing, or is there something we haven't covered today? I see a raised hand, Marilyn.
Hi, I had someone in my house before, so I was so self-conscious for even speaking, but it goes to what we're talking about. Like I didn't want that person who was, anyway. I appreciate so much everything I've heard shared, and the question about, you know, where we're at on the emotional roller coaster. And I think early on, I think Barbara posed the question about, or one of you posed the question about, you know, what's hard right now, where you're at in your process. And my memoir is, I can just read you the 2 sentences that I say it's about, which is facing breast cancer at 46, Marilyn begins to speak up for her body for the first time in her life. In the end, she loses her breast, but finds her voice and recovers her sense of self from female body shame. And so there's like in my memoir, it's like I have this, like that's the frame. The breast cancer thread is the frame of the story. But what I'm discovering and what gets really scary is that there's another thread that takes place when I'm 20, and it has to do with it's a Me Too story, and it involves my mother and her finding out something about me, and you can tell I can't even say it on a recorded thing. But anyway, that's a thread through the story, and I'm starting to realize or question. There's 2 things. One is I'm really beginning to question if this other story that I have so much shame around and have worked through. I mean, I like have worked through it in many ways, which is different than putting it on the page and putting it out into the world. My hunch is that that's the primary story, and that that's the story that wants to be told, and that that's the story that I'm here to tell to the best of my ability. But I also find that the other interesting piece of that, and I think this speaks to where some of the challenges with living life and writing memoir is that your life goes on even after the end of the story, and you may still, whatever the transformation is in the story, you know, you still carry it, whatever those the places that you carry, you still carry them. I mean, I'm not a therapist, but but that's my experience. And what I'm experiencing now is I had a change in my life recently. My father died in December, and the thing that happened with my mother at age 20 is something that I have had the thing I want most in the world, and the thing I fear most is my mother and I having a conversation about this thing. And so it's the dynamics are now shift, and I am planning to just have a conversation with her about it, not in any way, I mean, from a place of love, I'll just say that. And so it's also making me rethink, like, okay, keep listening to your story and let it be what it wants to be. And it's okay if it's not what you thought it was or needed it to be until now to get where you are in the process. I don't know if that makes sense. I once heard Hope Edelman say, sometimes writing memoir, we write them, sometimes it takes we're still writing a memoir, and that's sometimes because we're still living to the end of it. Like we haven't lived out that transformation yet. I don't know. I'll just say that. That's where I'm at. Thank you for listening.
Well said. I just want to say beautifully said, and the part about just listening to your story, keep listening. I mess with fiction every now and then, and my fiction professor would always talk about you have to wait until your characters start talking to you, and that's when you'll know what their story is because they're telling it to you. And I feel like there's some kind of vague or something related to writing memoir and our own story, and what you said about listening for it and listening, keeping your ears open, and I really like that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, maybe there are other people who've had that experience. Suzette said, yeah, that you start out writing your memoir thinking it's going to be one thing, and then you get to a certain point and you realize, oh no, this is what it's about, really. And sometimes it's the process of writing it, the exploring, that's gotten you there. Somebody else want to talk? Madeline, why not you? I kind of have a feeling I know what you'll say, but.
Yeah, I mean, my memoir did not start out as a memoir at all. It started out as a story about my aunt who was murdered by the Nazis, and I thought I was writing my whole life. Well, it started out because I translated letters that she had written from prison in Nazi Germany. I translated those letters with my mother. When I was in my 30s, my mother had kind of stashed away those letters for a long time. And after we translated them, I tried to get the letters published. This was in the 1980s and was totally unsuccessful. And it was such a painful thing. I just shoved it all away and never really dealt with it. And then when my mother died, I really regretted that I hadn't done more with these letters when she was alive. And so after her death, it got resurrected. But what I discovered is that I was really writing a book about my relationship with this woman that I had only known through these letters. And so the whole process, the whole thing transformed. And then actually it was through the peer group, a peer critique group that I'm in, that actually Linda is also in, that with the feedback I got from the members of the group, I really discovered the arc of my story, which I hadn't seen at all.
I want this book to come out, Madeline. I really do.
Yeah. I think sometimes, and I see you, Lisa. I just wanted to say about the when it's a different story, I have found that those conflicting stories sometimes masquerade as writer's block, and it feels like we can't move forward, and it's because we're not writing the right story for that moment. And so discovering that is amazing. Like having seen that you were working on one thing and then to realize, wait a minute, this is something else, similar to also what Marilyn talked about. There's so many layers, especially with memoir. I think it happens with fiction. Suzanne had a similar experience with historical fiction recently, but it's like our brains communicate with us in mysterious ways sometimes, and those hidden stories come forth, seeping through the cracks of what we think we're working on. Lisa, did you want to add something?
Yes, please. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for sharing that with us. And it brought a bunch of things up for me. I've had breast cancer 3 times, and some of those, traumas. And for me, it's been about, that's part of the sort of paralysis. I was an advocate for 10 plus years, telling that story, not writing it per se. And what's blocking me in coming back to writing memoir is I don't know that that's what I want to write about. I'm pretty sure it's not. but how do I write about these other things where that is sort of like a tangential thing? You know, where it's sort of like if you're writing like even like a chapter and there's a hurricane over in Australia, but your book takes place in, I don't know, Ukraine. I'm making all of this up. And the hurricane has nothing to do with you. And you put this thing about the hurricane, and then authors are like, I mean, readers are like, what? Wait, that hurricane, what does it have to do with this, right? Sort of like this big thing that captures people's attention. So if I'm like, oh, you know, after cancer number 3, I'm sorry, I have to laugh. You know, how do you thread that needle where you can, where maybe these things are pertinent in some way, but you don't want to go down this giant rabbit hole. And I don't know if that it relates for you, Marilyn, at all.
I don't know if you were asking me, but what comes to my mind, I'll just say that, you know, as we're having this conversation, one thing occurs to me is that sometimes, well, I love what Barbara, what you said about how the writer's block is sometimes an indication that we're not telling the story that wants to be told, is what I heard you say, I think. And I think sometimes we start out telling the story that's, someone else talked about safety earlier. It was Karen, I think. You know, we start out telling the story that we can tell, that it's safe enough to tell, and within that, that does sort of, for me, in my experience, that became the container for the story that wants to be told. And I think then letting that container fall away, the one that I think I need to tell still needs a container. I think, to go to what Suzanne was saying in the chat. I don't know if that even answers what you were saying, Lisa, but.
Thank you. I love the idea of the container falling away. Thanks, Marilyn.
I think this also gets to, as Barbara said, a whole other aspect, which is about the structural concerns of memoir, which we're going to address in another webinar.
Yes. We are we're a few minutes away from the top of the hour. I have a quote that I want to read from the newsletter that my memoir client writes. She sends it out weekly. And she's writing about her editor, who said that this was when she was working on her first memoir. No matter how truthful I was about myself, the person described in my memoir would not be me. This means that the woman described in the memoir is the me I used to be. And which also goes to there's a quote from Alice in Wonderland about, you know, it's no use going back to yesterday because I was a different person then. And I think in wrapping up, the emotions here, sometimes having some distance from what's happened can be helpful, but that doesn't mean that revisiting the past doesn't stir up emotions that we had. And that's what makes us human. Suzanne?
And I'm sorry to break in.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, but this is just, we have our three more webinars coming up, and you're welcome to come to any or all of them. They'll all be recorded. And if you want to join the interest list for Mainly Memoir, you can just point your camera at this little whatever it's called, QR code, and it'll take you to the right form for that. It's very simple and quick. Or you can just go to mainlymemoir.com, and there's plenty of places where you can sign up for that there as well.
We also wanted to mention, if there's anyone who is thinking about joining us for Mainly Memoir, but is unsure or has questions about what it's like to be at a writing retreat, you can leave a message in the chat or send us a direct message. And we're happy to have a one-on-one call with you to talk about that and see if it's if it's a good fit for you.
So with that said, this was, I hope you all enjoyed this particular call. I thought we got to some really good stuff here.
Me too. We did. Thank you all for sharing and being vulnerable and open to talking about the emotional roller coaster.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you. And we hope to see you next month.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.